Thank you for being a part of this event where we will be highlighting the work that we have done in identifying approaches within food systems that can help Canada meet the Sustainable Development Goals, commonly known as the SDGs. I will begin by speaking about the SDGs in general before explaining our approach, after which I will pass it off to presenters from each of the three pillars of our work. So the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015 by United Nations member states, and they apply to all member states regardless of their state of development. They are an ambitious set of targets, 17 in all, that aim to provide states with measurable goals towards sustainable and equitable development by the target date of 2030. While the goals themselves are laudable, it is worth noting that the framework is not perfect and has received its share of criticisms, including the seeming prioritization of the economy over the environment, an absence of dialogue on the effects of discrimination and racism, and a lack of separate goals for Indigenous peoples. Despite these shortcomings, the Sustainable Development Agenda was unanimously adopted by member states and serves as a useful template for collaborative international development. While there are many areas of the food system that can have an impact on the SDGs, our approach was to focus on three action areas which have the potential to create substantial progress on all 17 SDGs. The first area is healthy school food, and this work was led by the Coalition for Healthy School Food. Second, Indigenous food sovereignty is an area that was led autonomously by our partners at Plenty Canada. And finally, the area of equitable access to healthy, sustainable food was led by us at Food Secure Canada. I will now pass it over to Debbie Field, coordinator of the Coalition for Healthy School Food.
Great. Well, great to be here and talk about how school food and the SDGs have been actually a good process for us. We started the process and asked ourselves two questions. Could the SDGs help us figure out how we could get the Canadian government to implement a national school food policy and program? In other words, could we say to the Canadian government, you know, you signed on to the SDGs, you know, you are a signator to a lot of international accords and documents that allow you to see your role in the broader community. Could this help us convince them that they should implement a national school food program? And in a way, more interesting for us was, could we also see if looking at the SDGs could help us clarify some of our big strategic questions about, you know, what are the biggest benefits of a school food program? And so we began a process that really tried to both look outwards to the government and also take what we could from the SDGs and reflect on our own experience. One of the things we did was develop the first school food wheel in the world, actually. So this was kind of nice that it was a Canadian group that did this, and it's been shared a lot globally. And in fact, some of the federal government, then Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Karina Gould, you know, tweeted this out and was very pleased to see this way of reflecting it. So this allowed us to look at the SDGs as they began to come together. Next slide. So just a little bit about the coalition. I see many names, of course, of so many of you who have known the coalition or have been involved one way or another for a long time. It's always great to be at a Food Secure Canada annual meeting because the Coalition for Healthy School Food was founded at a Food Secure Canada meeting in Halifax in 2024. Wow. No, in 2014. Of course, we've had a long tradition of being housed and hosted by Food Secure Canada. And we have national staff in Ontario and Quebec, myself in Toronto, and Ken is in Quebec. And then we have active chapters and coalition staff across the country. So it's very exciting to see how we've been able to grow as a project housed inside Food Secure Canada, and has helped us see the way in which advocacy for school food can actually, I think, be a good way of looking at food advocacy of other of our themes, I think, that we're all interested in and working on at Food Secure Canada. Next slide. Looking at the SDGs did help the coalition figure out quite a lot of, as I've said, our vision and our mission and our focus. And when you look at the SDGs, we notice that actually a lot of them, like, you know, clean water and fish, can be a part of of a good school food program. But it came down to perhaps these four biggest ones, and in particularly these two: zero hunger and good health and well-being. And a very interesting process for us, funded by the Government of Canada through the SDG process, was to work with a great organization in BC called the Single Mothers Alliance. They're now called Family Equity. They did some focus groups with single mothers in BC on what in the SDGs did they think worked for them with a school food program. It also, looking at these SDGs, allowed us to really focus on these themes as we talked and met with politicians and government staff. And so really what's amazing about our process, our 3-year process, is starting from where we were 3 years ago to where we are now, working on the SDGs, helped the coalition develop policy briefs, which in fact worked at the federal level. I'll talk a little bit more about this in another slide. Next slide. So as I've said, and those of you who are at the last part of the meeting, this is our pre-budget submission. This is what we hope will happen. And the SDGs informed our language, and we included the SDGs in every pre-budget submission we made, both in 2024, 2023, and 2022. I think almost everybody who was on this call was on the last one, so I won't go through this. Next slide. I mentioned these focus groups that the Single Mothers Alliance, now called the Center for Family Equity, did in BC. What was really amazing was the demographics of the groups that were asked about how they felt about school food. So 38%, oh my goodness, 38% identified as racialized, 38% identified as Indigenous, 76% were living below 40,000, and 15% below 10,000, and another 15% below 19,000, another 23% under 29%. 60% were on fixed income, 45% on disability assistance, and 15% on income assistance. So any way you could look at it, this demographic would be a demographic that was very understanding of issues of food insecurity and income insecurity. And yet within this group, there was a great interest in school food and a great desire to be involved in helping to design quality school food programs. They said in the group that universal school food systems would address personal, financial, and social needs for the families who participated, particularly food security needs. And this is a complicated debate. Many of you on the call know the debate often amongst those who think that income security measures are the important measures that we need to be advocating for, and that a school food program could be seen as a Band-Aid rather than the great income redistribution that we are all working for. So it was really important that low-income women, racialized and Indigenous low-income women, really saw a school food program as being something that they wanted. They talked a lot about the access to healthy and nutritious meals and food literacy education being important. Parents and caregivers supported the campaign for a universal school food system to provide healthy, nutritious food to children, regardless of their family's income and status. They talked about how a universal school food program would eliminate the shame, stigma associated with accessing targeted school food programs. And so this lays the basis, I think, of looking at next steps for a school food program in Canada and for a movement for income redistribution. Next slide. This was a word mark that the focus groups did. And again, I was surprised that zero hunger came up as the thing they checked off and said the most often, as well as good health and well-being. They discussed many of the goals that at the SDGs: no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, reduced inequality, responsible consumption and production, issues related to farming. And these were repeatedly mentioned. The importance of school food programs in decreasing plastic waste from disposable lunch items and food packaging was also mentioned. So goal 13, climate change. The lack of a standalone goal for Indigenous reconciliation was raised as a major limitation of SDGs, as well as the hindrance to government as they evaluated programs. As Indigenous people face unique challenges in all aspects of life that are rooted in colonialism and oppression. And Wade discussed this, and I think this is a key theme that Food Secure Canada and our groups that have worked together on the last SDGs need to continue to be thinking about. How can we advocate to the world community to have an 18th goal that could look at Indigenous food sovereignty? Next slide. Looking at SDGs in this kind of holistic way for a school food program led us also to really think about multiple benefits of school food programs. And one of the very good things that's happened recently is the Errol Family Foundation and Roots Consulting prepared a report that went to the federal government on the multiple benefits. Again, really looking at this in the SDG approach. There's not one benefit to school food, but a multiple benefits, as there are when we look at the SDG wheel. And those multitude of benefits are, of course, providing immediate relief to household budgets. And that's, again, what we heard in the Single Mothers Alliance focus groups, that they wanted this help that a school food program would provide to them, but that it also improves students' learning outcomes. And one of the very interesting parts of all of this work, if you're interested, go look at the report later, are some studies from Sweden and the United States that look on a return on investment and show that actually, we'll show this one. For the US, that for $1 invested in a school meal program, you get a $2 return on investment. And it's always hard for us who do school food, not because we want to see it as an economic good, though we understand the economic goods. And again, support what Wade said a little earlier about how we don't want to reduce all the SDGs to the economic benefits. But it is pretty interesting to imagine the kind of economic benefits of a universal school food program. From Sweden, it was quite startling. They were able to prove either a $4 or a $7 return on investment. And they had proof that it increased mothers' labor market participation by 5%, which is really quite astounding. And when we think about patterns in Canada, and we finally got something we think Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Finance, might respond to. There was also higher lifetime earnings, which passed on to the next generation, and people had improved health and were even taller. And we have another study from China that looks at school lunches and saw, again, an increase in mothers' participation rates. I'll just go back to the slide before for a second, Ken. Yeah, so this whole idea of the multitude of benefits. So we get this increased maternal workforce participation, creating of jobs and strengthening local food economies, improving health and food security, strengthening Indigenous communities. And you can see that the SDGs helped the movement for school food in Canada look at it in a holistic way. Next slide. And so I just want to end with a couple thoughts. Food Secure Canada is looking, and the coalition, I think, is looking to continue the work we started. It's great to be here with partners looking at equitable access and Indigenous food sovereignty. How can looking at the SDGs help us puzzle out what are both the benefits of a school food program in terms of income supports and health benefits, both looking at a universal program for all children and yet understanding, as we do from the Swedish study, that those in the lowest percentile incomes might have an over benefit from a school food program. How can we look at education, food literacy, local economic development, climate change goals, and how can we ensure that there's an understanding that in Canada and globally, we need to have an additional SDG goal? So that's all for me now, and happy to answer questions later after we've had the other presentations.
Thank you, Debbie. Just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to have the coalition hosted at the FSC, because there's so much overlap in the work we do. And it's great to be abreast of all the developments in the world of the National School Food Program campaign. And speaking of people that we enjoy working with, I just wanted to move on to our next group of presenters at Plenty Canada to talk about the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Action Area. So Jess and Rosie, if you please.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, bonjour, everyone. I'm Jess McLaughlin from Long Lake 58 First Nation, and we are in Thunder Bay on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation people. Want to introduce?
Sure. I'm Rosie, and I am a settler of Irish and Scottish descent, and have the great pleasure of working alongside Jess here, and also with Marissa and Wade, collaborating on a few parts of this project we're going to tell you about. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, so thanks, Deb. We really enjoyed listening to your PowerPoint and the work that you're doing at the Healthy School Food Coalition. And, I was saying to Rosie when you were presenting that we took a totally different spin on this, but we think like the work is all complementary, and thanks. We're excited to hear from everyone else today. So as Wade mentioned, this project was sourced out to Plenty Canada, which Larry McDermott is a board member of Food Secure Canada, I believe, on this call. Bonjour, Larry. And Rosie and I were hired to administer this project. So we've been presenting this project as a collaboration when we go and travel around between Plenty Canada, Food Secure Canada, Employment Social Development Canada, and of course the UN, who ultimately brings us some clout. And also, this is where the goals were established.
Next
Oh yeah,
slide.
next slide. I thought I could switch it. I'm dumb. So I guess from all of the work that Plenty has been doing over its lifetime, the work that Rosie and I have been doing in our own individual practices, and through all of the people that we've got to meet over the last 2 years for this project and form these focus groups. We don't really call them focus groups. We've been calling them relationships. We're like trusted relationships where we build friendships of like continued relation to go back to build on their projects and to build on our learning together. So we know that the work happening in First Nation communities all over Canada and probably the world are actually achieving some, if not all, of the SDGs in one shot, in a sense. So the work that's already being administered by community projects that are either underfunded, have legislation blocking them, et cetera, in these hurdles and gaps, that this work could potentially achieve all of the SDGs. So on this slide, you see just a few of the people. There's a slide more in detail about the people that we've been working with, but here's just a few of the people that we've been working with to highlight their work and to bring this to a national, international level, to say like, here's some ways that Indigenous communities groups are achieving SDGs, and we wanted to show that. You can switch sides.
Next, yep. So the way we did this was, as Jess kind of hinted at, we did a few different things. First, we started out by learning building relationships with Indigenous organizations, communities, and groups. As Jess said, those that we saw already doing this work towards achieving these goals. So we did this by visiting them, lots of different community groups, and networking and meeting people. We also had the opportunity to give some direct funding support to the work that they were doing, and engage as well in lots of hands-on work with them, and work together to create, as you see here, case studies to highlight their work, policy primers, so people who are particularly, or partners particularly interested in influencing policy. We worked in collaboration with them to come together and do 3 policy primers or policy briefs. And we're going to do a gathering with these partners for feedback soon in March. And then, of course, the final report.
I guess something to just an add is that we have been staying in communication with these people. Like I think I said, is like we don't really see them as focus groups. We see these people as relationships for forever.
So these are some of a list. We won't go through this exactly, but some of the groups that we've been interacting with and collaborating with as well. Next slide.
So a big part of this project, when we kind of like, you know, Deb explained, there's 17 SDGs that were developed by the UN, and then Food Secure Canada, you know, highlighted or identified certain SDGs that really molded into the work that they were doing and thought that we should be advocating or learning more about on the ground. When we got into communities and based in past work, we soon realized that the SDGs that were developed by the UN were really hard to translate in communities, like Indigenous communities. And I think, Deb, you mentioned this on one of your slides, is that Indigenous communities have this whole different perspective of how we engage, how we interpret, how we see things in a worldview. So one of the things that Rosie and I, in collaboration with all of the partners that you've seen on the slide before, have been working on is indigenizing all of the SDGs, which we'll talk about briefly in a minute. I wanted to add is like, we have been told multiple times throughout this project that we're very advantageous and that, you know, ambitious. Yeah. So yeah, very ambitious to take 4 SDGs that we should have been focusing on and really just saying, no, we want to accomplish them all. So like me, and Rosie just was telling me that I ingrained this in her brain, but for me, when I think of zero poverty, and then I think of partnerships for the goals, they are one and the same. They overlap. So like for me, this is a holistic view of how the SDGs connect, and how we achieve them all is by achieving them all together. And I think, and you're only going to get a snapshot, but I think we can kind of show you what we mean in the next slide.
So here's an example of really, this is changing how we think about sustainable development. So here you see the UN SDG 2 of zero hunger, which is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So those 3 big areas. But through an indigenized lens, an Indigenous informed goal, this changes to thinking about food as sacred and a sacred gift from Creator. So this sort of project asks the question, how would we act differently if we thought of food as sacred?
Just another example is Goal 13, climate action. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And the indigenized informed goal is defend our mother, which means always acting in natural law. So like, obviously, there's more to what we're saying than just this 2-word description. But I just want to add is that when we would go into communities using the 17 goals, we were often met with blank faces and a lot of confusion. And we no longer face that issue when we come in with the indigenized goals. You can flip the slide.
So the other one other example here to change how we think about sustainable development is changing the idea of no poverty to an idea of sharing abundance. And you can see in this symbol here, this is a dish with one spoon treaty wampum belt, which some of you might be familiar with, but it really represents the idea and agreement to take care of all of our relations. And that includes, as I've learned, not just human relations, but all relations in creation.
And I'll just add before we flip slides is that not all the goals came out, like they didn't come out this easy, like where it was UN, like the UN goal came out to one goal. We have combined via our partners, via our research, via all of our work, that some goals combine into one indigenized goal. So we actually have, I think, 14 goals. There's 14 indigenized goals, and rather than 17 goals. So as you see, and back to my comment about this holistic approach to achieving goals, is that we've now taken 17 and pushed them into 14. That sounds so bad, but that the accomplishment of these is done in a really holistic approach and is easier for us to relate to the communities and partners that we're working with throughout this goal. And at the end of this project, well, actually, we just completed it today, is you'll have a whole legend of these goals along with an info something or other, infographic or info something that will further unpack that and connect that to the work. You can flip slides. So in addition, we were talking that we have done 3 case studies. So we chose to do one on Plenty Canada. So we figured that case studies were, a way to highlight communities or Indigenous organizations doing work that was achieving the SDGs. So our host organization and our leader, our fearless leader, Plenty Canada, really we recognize that they in all the work that Plenty does, achieves pretty much every SDG goal. So in the case study, we talk about Plenty's work, and then we relate that to every indigenized and SDG goal, and further then talk about how they're doing that, and provide examples on how government can get behind that, what legislation needs to change, what policies are impeding or impeding that work. And so that's kind of the idea around the case studies. We also did a Pikwakanagan Youth Cultural Connections, and then a larger one on Indigenous forestry across Canada. So we focus on 4 organizations doing interesting work. And we do believe Sydney Richards is on this call, and the food forest people in Saskatchewan are one of those people who we will be highlighting in that case study. Next slide.
So as we spoke about before, some specific pieces that we're creating that are focused on policy. So one is in collaboration with Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective, and that is titled Our Responsibilities to Water. So thinking about flipping the way we think about water to be what are our responsibilities and how can we work together. So that's an interesting one. One in collaboration with people who are putting together a buffalo treaty, and another that kind of zooms out a little bit and thinks about what we heard back over and over again from people is how are we going to collaborate across sectors and departments and jurisdictions to work together to really achieve these goals. So that focuses in on that type of collaboration that we heard was needed. Next slide, please.
So, the next steps for this project, obviously, everyone on this call probably knows that there was a second call for funding. Number one, we're hosting an event with all of those partners, just to say like, hey, thanks for everything. Also like, hey, we're not going away no matter what. And then Plenty Canada has submitted an application to ESDC for the I think it's, I forget the bigger project name, but anyways, the 3-year project where we hope to flush this out further, you know, put some targets to the goals, go back, find more partners, find some more community relationships that are doing amazing work, which we've already done and we'll be inviting to our March 18th event, and then revisiting, tracking that, and really elevating, and I mean, I'll use the ESDC's words here, but scaling up those projects that are achieving goals so that we can further advocate to you and others, governments, whatever, that like these ancestral practices that are happening just on the ground are actual ways to achieve all the goals and not to overcomplicate it in this big Western system in like, yeah, and just that we're really highlighting and showing the work that they're doing, and hopefully going to be able to show highlight more and track that over time. I don't know if you had anything to add.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. And I think, well, one thing I'd add is just reaching out to more partners to, as Jess said, refine this whole framework and think about the ways that it connects with different people's work.
Yeah, and thank you. It's been a real privilege to do this project.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly pass it up to Marissa to present the next action area.
Thank you. Thanks, Wade, and thanks, Jess, Rosie, and Debbie so far for presenting. To begin this section, first and foremost, I'll introduce myself. Sorry. My name is Marissa Alexander. I am the other half of the co-ED team at Food Secure Canada, and I'm very excited to be able to turn this next section over to our one of our contributing researchers on the Equitable Access Action Area, Leslie Touré Kapo. Leslie, nous avons remerciant d'être ici et nous sommes ravis d'entendre parler du travail que vous avez effectué. À vous.
Merci beaucoup, Marissa. Merci, Wade. Merci aussi à Debbie, Jess et Rosie pour les interventions avant que j'ai écouté avec attention. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Tout est bon, parfait. Comme Marissa l'a bien expliqué, je m'appelle Leslie Touré Kapo et je suis professeur en études urbaines au Centre Urbanisation, Culture et Société de l'Institut national de recherche scientifique à Tiohtià:ke, Montréal. Et c'est l'occasion peut-être dans cette Assemblée générale de revenir sur le rapport que nous avons rédigé avec ma collègue Dina Housseni sur l'accès à l'alimentation locale au Canada francophone à partir de perspectives antiracistes et décoloniales. Et si on peut passer sur l'autre slide, ce rapport a été rédigé et produit à partir d'un concours de circonstances, puisque je travaille surtout sur les enjeux de la construction sociale, de la race, de la classe et du genre et leurs impacts sur les trajectoires de vie des habitantes et des habitants des quartiers populaires, surtout notamment sur les questions de la jeunesse. Et l'alimentation n'était pas nécessairement... Ah, je vois qu'on me demande de rapprocher mon micro, peut-être que je vais l'avancer. L'alimentation n'était pas une de mes spécialités ou un de mes champs d'intérêt principaux, mais quand FSC est venu me contacter, c'était l'occasion peut-être de revenir sur les systèmes alimentaires de la jeunesse racialisée qui m'intéressait dans mon travail, puisque mon expertise en recherche et en intervention s'appuie surtout sur une expérience en intervention sociale et en éducation populaire au sein de ces espaces marginalisés en France et au Québec. Donc, cette opportunité de penser les systèmes alimentaires à partir d'une perspective antiraciste et décoloniale posait plusieurs questions, notamment quels sont les systèmes alimentaires des jeunes avec lesquels je travaille, des participants et des participantes avec lesquels je travaille, surtout lorsque une définition de la jeunesse d'une des jeunes femmes avec lesquelles j'ai travaillé, que je vais vous présenter, était la suivante. Et là, je cite: « Quand je vais déménager de chez ma mère, je vais comprendre la vie. Quand je vais devoir cuisiner for real, les plats traditionnels, je peux te dire la recette, j'ai vu ma mère le faire. Je peux t'énumérer tout ce que tu dois faire. Quand je vais déménager et puis que je n'aurai pas le choix, que je vais devoir faire mes tentatives et que c'est foiré, c'est moi qui vais le manger seul, Je pense que ça va me responsabiliser. Donc, dans cette définition de cette jeune femme, on voit que l'alimentation est vue surtout comme une forme d'émancipation. Et c'est ça qui m'intéressait à la lumière de ce rapport et de l'opportunité que m'offrait de rédiger ce rapport sur la question de ces systèmes alimentaires des jeunes Montréalais et Montréalaises racialisés. Mais plus précisément, si on revient sur les systèmes alimentaires de la jeunesse noire de la Petite Bourgogne, un des quartiers sur lesquels j'ai travaillé, on voit que le quartier historique de la communauté noire de la ville de Montréal est l'un des plus diversifiés et multiculturels. En fait, en travaillant dans un organisme communautaire qui travaille avec les enfants et les jeunes du quartier, on voyait que l'accueil des devoirs et les activités culturelles étaient structurés autour du partage des repas. Notamment lorsque la place de l'alimentation dans le quartier et plus largement, plus précisément dans l'organisme était extrêmement symbolique et extrêmement importante, notamment par exemple dans la prise en compte des différents régimes alimentaires, des communautés musulmanes par exemple, ou dans l'attention portée au fait que tout le monde ait mangé à sa faim lors des grands rassemblements. Ce qui était central dans la préoccupation des organisateurs et des organisatrices du quartier. Mais on pouvait aussi distinguer dans ces systèmes alimentaires de cette jeunesse noire du quartier la présence des mères du quartier qui géraient une cuisine collective, qui faisait office de restaurant communautaire, de marché de proximité et de services de panier alimentaire. Donc, l'opportunité de rédiger ce rapport sur l'accès à l'alimentation locale dans le Canada francophone et à Montréal en particulier, permet de revisiter à la fois mon propre travail et des projets communautaires sous l'angle des systèmes alimentaires. Et c'est ça qui va être intéressant dans ce rapport qui, finalement, et là on peut passer à l'autre slide, à partir de ces perspectives antiracistes et décoloniales, va venir essayer de comprendre le mouvement alimentaire au Canada, francophone en particulier, à partir de ces différentes perspectives. Donc, qu'est-ce que produit ce rapport? C'est surtout une synthèse des littératures anglophones et francophones sur les systèmes alimentaires, en faisant le constat que les perspectives critiques et antiracistes et décoloniales dans la littérature francophone sont encore très marginal, très limité et très peu abordé finalement. Donc, un des points forts de ce rapport, c'est de mettre en évidence et de répertorier les initiatives et les différents projets en alimentation durable au Canada francophone et au Québec en particulier. Donc, qui vont se structurer surtout dans le mouvement alimentaire autour de la dépossession, du processus de dépossession, du jeu entre la visibilité et l'invisibilité des différentes communautés et de l'accessibilité. C'est-à-dire ce qui est en jeu, ce sont les territoires, les ressources et les savoirs, notamment autour de ces populations. Donc, en constatant à partir de ce rapport qu'un manque de moyens, de ressources et de financement des différents projets et initiatives en alimentation durable dans cette perspective antiraciste et décoloniale. Mais surtout, un manque très évident au niveau de l'infrastructure de base dans les processus de production, de distribution et de consommation, mais aussi de sensibilisation, notamment en ce qui va m'intéresser moi, sensibilisation aux questions des jeunes et des différentes communautés noires et racialisées sur les systèmes alimentaires. Donc, pour conclure, un des points forts aussi du rapport a été de poser les bases, et c'est un peu une contribution inattendue, de ce qui a été propulsé après par la suite par Afua, à Santewa, qui a été la coordinatrice communautaire du projet sur la souveraineté alimentaire des communautés noires autochtones pour le mouvement pour la souveraineté alimentaire des communautés noires au Québec. Donc, peut-être pour conclure, ce rapport va venir résonner avec plusieurs objectifs de développement durable de l'Organisation des Nations Unies. L'objectif numéro 1, pas de pauvreté. L'objectif numéro 2, la faim zéro, pas de faim. L'objectif numéro 3, la santé et le bien-être. L'objectif numéro 4, l'éducation. Là, je parlais aussi de sensibilisation. L'objectif numéro 10, la réduction des inégalités. Et ce qui va aussi m'intéresser dans l'objectif numéro 11, d'avoir des villes et des communautés durables. Et enfin, l'objectif numéro 12, sur la consommation et la production responsable. Et je m'arrêterai là.
Merci, Leslie. Prochaine slide, s'il te plaît, Ken. Dans le cadre de la section recherche du domaine accès équitable, le RAD a soutenu les 3 projets suivants. Sustainable Consumption for All, Food Sovereignty for Black Communities, ainsi qu'un webinaire sur la sécurité alimentaire organisé conjointement avec Proof. Prochaine slide. Merci. Ce domaine d'action a également permis d'organiser différentes réunions avec divers partenaires comme ces opportunités pour le RAD de représenter l'optique de la sécurité alimentaire avec nos partenaires de la campagne de lutte contre la pauvreté. Nous avons également co-organisé des projections de Food for the Rest of Us avec un panel SDG avec les partenaires listés ici. Lastly, the Equitable Access Action Area offered opportunity for policy moments, including FSC's Eat, Think, Vote events for parliamentary candidates during the 2021 federal election, an event that we will likely be renewed during the upcoming election cycle, as well as multiple town halls where FSC created space to hear the voices of civil society and actors in the food movement to influence the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council and the renewal of the Food Policy for Canada. Please keep an eye out on FSC's Knowledge Hub for our equitable access synthesis recommendations that are coming very soon. And all of this work is highly relevant to our current approach to work on food affordability that we talked a little bit about at the AGM. We're very proud of the work done in this action area and the learnings we'll be taking forward. Thanks, Wade. Back to you.
Thank you, Marissa and Leslie. That was wonderful. And at this point, we will open it up for any questions from anybody present. You can do so in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Presenters, feel free to ask questions of the presenters if you feel, and yeah, you can direct your question to anybody or everyone. Bob, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very impressed with what I've heard here. I indicated earlier today that I'm an agroecologist, which is, of course, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Policy. It was started by Indigenous and peasant farmers, and it's very active in most parts of the world, not so much in Canada, but it is certainly worldwide. And I think it's important that if it hasn't been done already, that there are links to that certainly promotes Indigenous leadership and working with people who are on the ground and know what they're doing in terms of food and have dealt with the issues of poverty and the other issues that are part of the goals, sustainability goals. The other thing, and of course, La Via Campesina was the organization that they belong to. And I mentioned earlier about the National Farmers Union. I belong to that, and the international committee, which is made up of youth who are active leaders in that area. Several of us are advisors. The other point I would make is there are a lot of local Indigenous initiatives. I think in my area, Northumberland, Alderville First Nations has the Black Oak Savanna and are the largest savanna in Eastern Canada and are very much in leadership in terms of seed and local plant production. So I'm wondering if there's ways we can do more to link that. I mean, I don't want to go on about my work, but I am the global advisor to a project called Dryland Solutions, which is looking at secure food and everything that goes with that in the most violent, torn, poorest parts of the world. The main project I'll be working on is in Somalia. So I think the more we can work together and the more I can take your recommendations to the organizations that I'm involved with, I would very much like to support everything I've heard today. Thank you.
Did anybody want to comment on that? Any of our presenters?
I think thanks, Bob, for your suggestions to the international connections. Some of my previous work has been with small Indigenous campesinos and campesinas in southern Mexico, and I know there's a lot of parallels there. to community work that's happening here. I will say, however, that there is from what I've learned over the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, is there's a really complicated relationship between Indigenous communities in Turtle Island and agriculture. So there's a lot of work there that is sensitive.
Yep.
So I think partnerships can be made, of course, but I think it's important to think about the history and the legacy and continuing land use practices that create conflicts.
Yeah, and I will just add, like, we would love to chat with you. I'm not going to say that we have enough time before the end of this project, but maybe in the next round. But is that we do have our finger on the pulse, like taking Rosie's comments in consideration. We do have our finger on the pulse of like things like seed saving networks in Indigenous communities, you know, more community-based agriculture solutions, you know, maple syrup harvesting, these kind of things that are like smaller scale, but not recognized on like a provincial or a federal level, or maybe even international. So that's why you wouldn't see that in this kind of first leg of the project, is because we also too are stuck on how do we actually pull that and communicate that to the world in the proper way. But we would love to speak more with you like post March 31st. But yes, wonderful suggestions, and that we do have that in mind. But and hopefully we get second round funding, and that this work is able to continue and really dive deep into that and to further, you know, dive deep into this work that we've already started. So thank you so much.
Well, I just say that's my focus in much of my work, what you talked about. I also just want to briefly comment that one of the reasons why people at the top of the government pyramid are not as receptive as they should be is because they have a daily lobby, and I won't try to get into labels, but these are organizations and people that do not want the government to basically expand any area of social program. And they're very powerful, very influential. I can talk to people about that if you want to, but if you're wondering why you're not getting a response sometime, it comes down to that.
All right. Did anybody else have any other questions or comments? Debbie?
Yeah, I just wanted to continue a bit of the conversation, both with Jess and Rosie and Leslie, about what is the best way moving forward in terms of knowing what's wrong with the frameworks that have been developed for either Indigenous food sovereignty or Black food sovereignty, from a perspective of something like, you know, the SDGs wheel. I mean, assuming that we are moving forward somehow together, I was really excited by the ideas that Jess and Rosie presented, and I love the images when you counterposed, you know, the SDG goal versus such a more holistic way of looking at it. I mean, have you thought of maybe visually representing that in some form at some point for the Indigenous community? And, you know, we've been thinking a lot in the coalition and have been having conversations with Wendy Wilson, who's on the call and on the board of Food Secure Canada, about, you know, how can the coalition integrate issues of Black food sovereignty and, of course, the higher rates of incident of food insecurity in the Black community in the work we do. So is it to integrate everything through, or is it to have separate principles, or, you know, what are people's thoughts about the best way to do this?
Well, I don't think we really know what we're doing. Like, you know, like as we were, yes, there's going to be like we're pushing it right to the arrow here at the end of March, but at the end, all of our documents are going to be made public and are going to be shared with you. And like, in the beginning of your question about like I had the privilege of spending some time with Leslie in Bella Bella this year and learning more about their work and all that other, Wendy was there as well. But I do think I see the need for further collaboration among these three groups to further, like, for us to even learn, like, we really loved your slide, Deb, on the wheel, you know, like, how do we work together to use what we've come up with in each of our separate pillars for, to, you know, incorporate that into all of this, like, in a more holistic approach. I do think that's, like, I think we're all banking on that this work that we've all tirelessly done for the last 2 years will be rewarded with some more terms or more years to do this in, because I think that's how we push this forward. Like, we're not saying that this work, like, the work that's happening in the communities is never stopping. It's how that advocacy piece, like, how do we advocate for those projects? First, how do we get to those projects and be able to help them understand, which is the point of the indigenized goals? And then how do we advocate that for what we learn that there are their hurdles back to the world, and then further grow, scale up those projects to then achieve more goals, you know, similar to what you're doing and similar to what Leslie and his team are doing. I think it's more time and more communication between the three groups. And I don't know if you would.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, this feels like step one of something that could go on for a while and needs a lot more input from various Indigenous cultures that we, you know, simply didn't have time or funds to go and meet and collaborate with. So yeah, I definitely think that the work of translating the SDG goals into an Indigenous framing is going to be really interesting to see how people react, and is it useful? And
I mean, we already know it's useful in Indigenous communities, but like, in some of the work we've been doing with Susan Alexander is that some of our solutions are very unorthodox to compare to what normal government solutions would be. So like, that's what I think that, like, the goals themselves really help. That's the method in relationship building in our communities. Like, right, there's this verbiage of 17 sustainable development goals. Well, how do we translate that and build this, like, make it a heart thing, and then take what we've learned, not take, but like co-create these things to help, you know, advocate so that these small projects, these small groups that are achieving so much in small little bundles, that like, that could help all of us on this call and all of our groups. So I think, yeah, like Rosie, you're right. It is step one of something. Well, I hope there's someone from ESDC on this call. But it's like, this is step one of, and like, for not to throw anyone under the bus, but is like, this could have been done before, you know, like the goals were developed in 2015, you know, we're in 2024, you know, like, what happened in between that 10 years? Like, FSC just got this funding 3 years ago. You know, it's the first piece that when Canadians were given the opportunity to go in and start talking about this, well, we need another chance, because you're right. And you said it really well in one of your slides, Deb, is that the context of each of our groups are very different, but there's so many similarities and so many overlaps in those groups. And that's, I think, up to our groups at FSC to maybe coordinate that for us. And it would be lovely. I don't know if Deb was supposed to be at that Bella Bella trip, but oh no, maybe not. Never mind. That was silly of me. But I think that that's the work that comes in phase two, are part of the work that comes in phase two, right? In addition to all the other work we have to do in our individual pillars.
I'll just add one thing and let someone else answer, but I think that the second part that Jess was talking about is like really translating for a policy audience to understand the work. You know, it's like a translation in both directions.
Yeah.
And so I think we've been very focusing on the one direction, but the next phase needs to really also focus on the advocacy piece and translating as well.
J'allais répondre rapidement. Et je vais répondre en français, je suis désolé que je veux me permettre, parce que je sais qu'il y a des traducteurs. Mais je pense que pour une réponse rapide, que Jess et Rosie ont bien nommé, c'est cette capacité d'adaptation et de flexibilité et de souplesse, en fait, de ces SDG qui ont été développés à une échelle globale, internationale, tout ça, dans des institutions internationales, pour répondre à des enjeux très spécifiques locaux, en fait. Donc, comment on prend euh, cette ces idées, en fait, pour les adapter à des besoins très spécifiques dans des projets, des initiatives, des organisations qui ont des besoins spécifiques dans des contextes spécifiques, que ce soit sur les communautés autochtones ou dans les communautés noires, par exemple. En fait, spontanément, dans la question de débit, moi, la personne auquel j'ai pensé, c'était Wendy Wilson, justement, dans les programmes qu'il développe en Nouvelle-Écosse et à Halifax, parce que c'est justement comment mettre ça en place. C'est ça qui est en jeu, en fait, développer des programmes à partir de ces SDG globaux sur mesure pour répondre aux besoins spécifiques des communautés, des institutions et des organisations dans des environnements spécifiques.
Thank you. Debbie, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just to loop us back to where we started tonight, which was at the Food Secure Canada annual general meeting, and to say to the board members who are here that, the idea that Indigenous and Black food sovereignty would be integrated into all of the strategic work of Food Secure Canada. So there would be a place where this kind of meeting could be, has, long been a vision of many of us. And, when Jess was on the board, certainly. So the challenge, I think, of course, always is to do theory, but also practical. And so to take the SDG work, I think, into the practical relationship building, which, ties in with the questions that people raised, that in the last chat, that we talked about how can FSC become the place where these conversations can happen. So I think that's the other real benefit of, and it's good that there's no funders here, because it's about what we do regardless of this particular money and how we keep these relationships and conversations going. And, very much in terms of Bob's comment, and a lot of these issues, whether it be for the Indigenous community or the Black community in terms of the traditional farm organizations. And the National Farmers Union is really trying to open up the conversation so that we, don't get stuck in those things. So yeah, so I really hope we continue these discussions both inside FSC and through SDG work.
Thank you. We are getting close to time, but I do appreciate the fruitful discussion, and we can continue if the presenters would like to stick around, but don't feel obliged to do so. It is 6:29. Janet, did you want to go ahead?
My quick comment is only directly in response to Debbie's comment about making sure this is reflected in the board's interest and what the board is doing along moving forward. And I can certainly speak on my behalf that I'm interested and willing and able to put the work in to try to bring these conversations at that level. And just to tell tales out of school, on our chats on the side, I can tell you that other board members are as well. So please hold us accountable. We will be working on it.
Yep, definitely. And one quick thing before everybody goes, thanks everybody for all the speakers, for Debbie and Rosie and Leslie and was it Jess? Sorry. You guys were amazing, interesting, riveting, knowledge sharing. I just loved it. Thank you so much. This is, I hope we get more funding, and if not, we're going to have to try to find ways to get more funding for you to work. And this is very important for all the talks that were done. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we'll make sure to cut this recording and send it to ESDC right before we say we don't need their funds. We'll make sure to cut all of the pieces that specifically say, this would be really fabulous, because I think we all know that, and it's, we're all in agreement here of how fabulous that would be for this work to continue, and it's going to continue regardless of if it's us or if it's those communities doing it. It would just be a lot easier if the we could get some federal funding behind it to be able to continue these collaborations. But thank you, everybody. I'll pass it back to Wade to close us off.
All right, thank you. So yeah, as we conclude this event, we'd just like to add the information presented here will be available on our website, and any new additions will be announced through our newsletter and other social channels. We would like to thank our numerous presenters today who have done amazing work on this project, and we would like to acknowledge the financial contribution of Employment and Social Development Canada, and note that the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the Government of Canada. Finally, thank you for being a part of the event for all the attendees, and we are just one part of a broad network of concerned organizations and individuals working to build more equitable and sustainable food systems in this country, and we need your support. So, thank you.